This video begins our discussion on the second language of structured query language, or SQL, which is called the data manipulation language. So as part of the data manipulation language, we're primarily looking at queries against the database, such as those that would return results. So we're going to use select primarily to retrieve that data. Additionally, as part of data manipulation language, we're going to insert data into tables, we're going to update data that already exists in the tables, and we're going to delete data that exists in the tables. We can also call procedures functions or other programs, and we can use describe or explain to show the structure of any existing tables. So to begin, we're going to identify table and column information using describe or explain. So this is basically going to show us the structure of the table. So if I wanted to see the table structure for the customer table, I'd either say describe customer or explain customer. So to show you what this is going to look like, here I am at the server. I'm going to go ahead and select the orders schema, which is basically the lecture schema. You'll notice here we have a customer table. If you want, you can click on the ERD tab to see the whole composition of this database. So what we're going to do is describe or explain the customer table. So I'll go ahead and just type in describe customer. I'll run the results. And you'll see here's the structure of the table. So we have all the fields here on the left, the data type for the next column, whether it's null or not null, if it's a primary key or not, any default values, and which columns auto increment. Additionally, you access this by clicking on the tables and clicking on any table here, for example, order line, and it will show you this exact same information. So order ID and product ID are foreign keys in this particular table. All right, the next thing we're going to show you is how to insert records into a table. In order to do that, we use the insert into command, and we can insert one or more rows at a time. So the syntax for the insert statement is insert into, and then we specify the name of the table, and then we optionally provide the table columns. Now, if we don't provide the table columns, we must provide a value for every single column that exists in that table. If we provide the table columns, then we only need to provide values for the ones that we specify, with the caution that we do need to provide values for any columns that cannot be null. Then we're going to say values, and then specify a comma-separated list of values. So to show you how to do this, if you were to try to insert a customer of Blue Trends with the ID of 17 and an address of 2500 California Plaza, Omaha, Nebraska 68178, the data for every single field in the customer table is provided, so I don't need to provide the column name. So I can just say insert into customer and then the values in the same order that the table has the fields. So primary key of the customer ID first of 17, then the name Blue Trends, then the street, city, state, zip code. Now, if I wanted to insert a record without providing values for every single column, I could say insert into customer and then just list out the columns that I want to insert into. So this would be name and zip code. And then I say values, Blue Trends, 68178. So this would only insert values for these two columns and all other values would be null. Now you may be asking, what about the primary key? The primary key cannot be null. That's correct, but we also have on the primary key the auto increment functionality has been implemented. So if I insert a new customer, it will automatically increase that customer ID by 1. So I'm going to go ahead and run these two queries to show you the results. So here we are back at the server. I'm going to go ahead and copy those two queries. I'll go ahead and run this first query and go back to the tables. Let's go to the customer table. Go to the table data, and we see that Blue Trends has been added and all their information has been provided. Now let's go ahead and insert customer with just the name and the zip code of Blue Trends with the same zip code. We go and open up the customer table again, go to the table data. We will see that the number has automatically incremented from 17 to 18. Now we just have the name and the zip code have been provided. All other values are null. Now, if we go back to this table structure, this is possible because we say here that street, city, state can all be null. If any of these were not null, then we'd have to provide a value for each one of these columns. Additionally, when inserting records with existing primary key values, we can ignore that insert. So just like if not exists or if exists when creating or dropping objects, we can say insert ignore, and this would ignore inserting a record if a value already had that primary key. So we say insert ignore into customer, the same values that we previously provided. This would fail safely rather than fail with an error. Additionally, if we wanted to change values of an existing record based on a primary key that already exists, we can say right after we do the whole insert statement, we can say on duplicate key update, and then say all the columns that we want to update. So customer ID would then equal the values of whatever was provided for the customer ID, and then the name equals whatever the values are for the name, and so on for all the values. So I'm going to go ahead and run both of these queries to show you what happens. So we're back at the server. I'm going to go ahead and paste these two queries. So this first one I'm going to go ahead and run. It says the query successfully executed, but 0 rows were affected. That's true. No rows were inserted. Now watch what happens if I get rid of this ignore syntax and try to run this query again. We get a duplicate entry 17 for key primary. That means that we're trying to insert a new value that has the same primary key as another value. So if we go to the customer table, we can see, yes, we already have a customer with a number 17. So now what I'm going to do is run this query. This should change the name to blue trending for customer ID 17. So this should now become blue trending. Nothing else has changed. So let's go ahead and run this query. Go back to tables and click on customer table data, and we see that this customer's name has changed from blue trends to blue trending. The next thing we're going to talk about is updating records in our tables. So in order to update records, we use the update command. And the syntax for the update command is update and then the table name, and then we're going to set the column name to a specific value. If we left it at just these two lines, it would update every single record for that specific column to the new value that's been provided. So what is critical here is this optional where condition. Optional in the case that maybe you do want to update all the records, then you leave off the where condition. However, if you want to only update a subset of your records, then you'll want to include the where condition. So let's look at an example. If I wanted to change the price to $775 for the product ID number 7, I'd say update product set price equal to $775 where the product ID equals 7. So I'm back here at the server. I've copied and pasted this query. Before I actually run it, let's go ahead and look at the product table. So we'll click on the product table and we see that product ID number 7 has a price of $150. So we're going to change that to $775. So I'll go ahead and run this query. It says that one row was successfully affected. So let's go back to the product table, to the table data, and we can see that yes, product ID number 7 has now been changed to $775. Now what I want you to do is try to insert and update records on your own. So make sure you select your personal schema. Don't use the lecture schema for this one. And then create the player table using the following syntax, and then insert a record for Michael Jordan using number 24 as his number with the team name of Bulls, and then insert 2 more players of your choice, and then change Michael Jordan's number back to the correct number of 23. So go ahead, try this on your own, pause this video, and then come back to compare your answers. All right, so I'm back at the server. I've selected my personal schema, which is the demo student schema. For your personal schema, it's going to be your net ID. And then I'm going to go ahead and paste all the questions. And then I'll comment them out with a pound sign in front of each one of these. All right, so the first question asks us to select our personal schema, so that's what we've already done. The second one asks us to create this player table, so I'm going to go ahead and just run this query. It says it successfully was created, so I'll go ahead and look at the tables and we see that we now have the player table. So now what I'm going to do is insert Michael Jordan. So just looking at the player table, I could either just provide team number and name because player ID auto increments, or I'll have to provide the player ID. Typically, I like to take advantage of the auto increment, so I'm going to just insert into player, and then I will select the columns that I'm going to insert. So I'm going to insert into team, number, and name. And then what I'm going to do is use values, and I'm going to provide the team, which is going to be Bulls. Now, notice here that I do put Bulls in single quotes. So any text entry that is going to go into your database must be surrounded in single quotes. However, numeric entries like number doesn't have to be in single quotes. So I just go ahead and type the number here. And the name, we're going to insert Michael Jordan again in single quotes. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and run this query. It says that one row was affected. So let's go back to the player table. And indeed, we do see inside of the table data, Michael Jordan has been inserted. Now it asks us to insert 2 more players of our choice, so I'm going to just copy 2 that I have, which is going to be Shaquille O'Neal and Karl Malone. Notice that I can actually insert multiple records in a single insert statement. Just right after the values, I put a comma, and then I put the same parentheses for each record that I'm going to insert. Additionally, you'll notice here that Shaquille O'Neal has a single quote in his name. So in order to actually insert a record with a single quote, we either need to put another quote in front of it, or we need to change these single quotes to double quotes, like this, and then change that to a single quote. Or finally, the last option that we can use is to just put a backslash in front of that single quote. The reason why this is a problem is if you just have one single quote here, you'll notice that this single quote actually ends that single quote. And so it's as if it's trying to insert all this data, and then nil is just some kind of additional information that is going to cause your query to crash. We'll go ahead and run this query, and we see that 2 rows were affected. Go to our tables and click on the player table on the table data tab, and we now see that we have 3 rows that have been inserted into our database. All right, the last query asks us to change Michael Jordan's number to the correct number. So we're going to go ahead and update the player table. And then we're going to change, using the keyword set, the number of Michael Jordan to 23. Now, if I were to run just this query right now, this would change all players in the player table to have a number 23. So I'm going to make sure that I include the where statement. Now, at this point, because we only have 3 records in the table, we could basically filter based off of any of these columns. The problem is what if there's another Michael Jordan that eventually enters the table? Then if we tried to update based on name, we could update more than one record. Or what if we tried to update based off a number? Then we could update more than one record. If we tried to update based off a team, what if there's more than one player that's on the team Bulls? So one of the best things to update by is going to be player ID. So I'm going to go ahead and say where player ID equals 1. Hit a semicolon, run this query, and it says the query successfully executed, 1 row was affected. If I go back to the player table, specifically the table data tab, we will see that Michael Jordan's number has been changed to 23.